The best way I can describe Bridgerton is that it's Pride and Prejudice meets Gossip Girl, but in a good way. This show is the epitome of a guilty pleasure because there are so many melodramatic elements and so many over-exaggerated or downright outrageous pieces of cinema woven together into something that resembles a high-budget soap opera that you should be rolling your eyes at, but instead find yourself actually glued to your TV to see more of it. I binged this show overnight because I was that hooked that quickly, but I must say that it's because of the first 4 episodes, and there are 8 episodes in total, that practically had me foaming at the mouth. But, and there is a but, it's the last half of the first season where I experienced a serious amount of qualms. Not enough to make me not recommend the show, but enough to make me wish the show had hit the ball out of the park from start to finish, rather than give me some blue balls for the last half. And I'll tell you what I mean by that, but without spoilers. This show is based on a book series, as mentioned, that centers around the Bridgerton family, specifically the 8 Bridgerton siblings. And it wasn't until after I watched this first season that where I did some research on the book series. And I think it's necessary to note that the book series centers on a different Bridgerton child in each book, rather than just keeping the center focus on just one of the children for the entire series. I really wish I would have known that going into this, because it probably would have improved my viewing experience with that mindset, especially during the latter half of the first season. But let's talk about what I liked about the show first, and then we'll move into some of the issues that I want to touch upon. Now, this show is like a type of fantasy series in a way that chooses where it wants to remain historically accurate to the time period while mixing it up with modern elements very present in today's world. From the fashion, the music, the hair, to the purposeful use of colorblindness in casting a beautifully diverse cast, it likes to have its cake and eat it too. And as long as you go in expecting to watch a fantasy with very little based in reality in the very time period it's in, it's very fun, and I can get on board with that. And the show isn't trying to be a History Channel period drama. Instead, it wants to be a Gossip Girl meets Downton Abbey melodrama while being set in the same time period of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. The time period is used as a backdrop, and then the rest just exists with no shame whatsoever. And I see no harm in utilizing the early 19th century era to showcase a highly stylized melodrama with very 21st century elements. It's an unusual combination that worked very well for me. It's all about the cast for this show, and thank God everyone does a great job in their role. And even though this is the first season and it centers around the romance between Daphne and the Duke, played respectively by Phoebe Dynevor and Regé Champage, this show is also heavily reliant on its ensemble and weaving a web of multiple storylines pretty effortlessly while keeping it mostly showcased on our 2 main leads. Now granted, some storylines and characters are certainly better than others, but I'm happy to report that the acting is quite good from everyone, and I wouldn't be recommending this show. I probably wouldn't have stuck with this show if the acting was not believable. The show does a great job at sweeping you away in the first few episodes, and you can't help but be engulfed by the overly romanticized, juicy scandal of it all, despite, your better judgments, much like how guilty pleasures tend to feel. I have to commend the pacing of the show because it is very quick, and they pack a lot of story into just 8 episodes. The costumes are gorgeously ornate, and I have to give praise to the overall production value. The colors are popping, and this is a very, very beautifully shot show, just visually speaking. It's just jaw-dropping to look at sometimes, not to mention the semi-gratuitous male nudity we do see from all the beautiful men on this show. But even I can't complain too harshly about that because, well, they are just simply that beautiful, but they can act, and so that's the important part. At least they can also act on top of looking incredibly handsome. As for my favorite characters, there's no denying the main two romantic leads in Daphne and the Duke are among my favorites, especially with, given how amazing their chemistry is and how commanding they are on screen together, which is only fitting given that they are the two leads of the show, even though I do take qualm with the character of the Duke as he progresses in the latter half of the season. I did get a little bit annoyed with him sometimes, but they both lead the season very well, and I'm curious where they take their characters should we get a season 2. But for me, the real MVPs for the show were the characters of Eloise and Penelope, played brilliantly by Claudia Jessie and Nicole Coughlan, respectively. Those two specifically got some of the best development over all of the supporting cast members, and they were also two of the more interesting characters, in my humble opinion, and I'm excited to see more of them. I also give this show praise for juggling so many modern elements that are so intricately woven into this early 19th century setting, from feminism and women's rights, LGBTQ undertones, also tackling both toxic and endearing spotlights on various forms of masculinity, growing up and coming of age, and then right back to the refreshing use of diversity, as I mentioned before. This show tackles a lot, and I applaud them for fitting so much into 8 episodes and having most of it flow pretty seamlessly. Now, as for the final episodes, or the latter half of the season, this is where I felt a certain spark had gone out. I was surprised how certain storylines were quickly evolving and in some ways resolving themselves into something else and then moving on to something entirely different than how it all started. It was almost like they squeezed in all of season 1 and season 2 into just one season. Almost as if they didn't know if they were going to get a season 2, and it felt jarring to me at times in the last half. There were certain payoffs that happened too quickly for me that I would have personally saved for a season 2. And it left me wondering where they can go with certain characters for season 2 and still have it be interesting. And with how excellent the first half of the season was, I was waiting for it to climb back up to that level that it's set from the get-go. And in some ways, with certain characters, it did, but in other ways, with a lot of characters, they shifted focus where other B storylines were moved to the forefront, and the spotlight was set on different characters that I didn't care nearly as much about. And again, it kind of felt like season 2 was crammed into the latter half of season 1. That being said, I did research on the book series after finishing this first season, and that's when I learned that each book in the series focuses on a different Bridgerton child. So in that case, it does make sense how much story we got specifically for the romantic leads of Daphne and the Duke, because this is their book. So with that in mind, and should the future series follow the books, generally speaking, and shift focus on other characters for future seasons, does that fix my initial qualms with the latter story beats of Daphne and the Duke? Maybe a little, since I know that the focus will now shift away from them, which disappoints me a little if they go that route, because I like these two actors as the leads quite a lot. But I still feel like, regardless of how the books actually play out and how much of it is the book's fault, I still feel that the presentation and pacing of the storylines could have been polished in the latter half with how they chose to evolve their story, and with many liberties I'm sure this series has taken to loosely adapt this source material. I see no reason why they couldn't have done the same for our two leads. Hold on to the spark of the first 4 episodes and play on it just a little bit longer, and maybe save a few storylines for season 2 so it feels more earned and less rushed. But in the end, I still binged this show so quickly. It kept me highly engaged and highly entertained, if not frustrated, for the last half with the never-ending scandals that keep arising. And I do see a lot of promise with future seasons, given the large ensemble, and if they do shift focus on the show's leads based on the books. I just wish they would have kept the energy of the first 4 episodes longer and carried us into a second season with a bit more strength than they did. So even though it wasn't perfect in the end, it was definitely a pure delight for so many other reasons, and I look forward to seeing more scandal and intrigue in future seasons, even if it has to involve other characters, which I'll just have to learn to get on board with. I'm going to give Bridgerton a B. And that's my review of Bridgerton, which is now streaming on Netflix. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on the show and how you felt about all the scandal that came out of it. So feel free to leave your thoughts and opinions down below. And as always, thank you all again for tuning in. Until next time, I'm Ryan Bamey, signing off. Bye, everyone.